Welcome back. We begin with a News 5 investigation.
Having to go to the hospital can be a frightening or scary experience anytime, and especially right now, especially for those who suffer from anxiety or PTSD.
During the coronavirus pandemic, hospitals across southern Colorado have modified their policies by limiting visitors.
In a story you'll see only on News 5, Chief Investigative Reporter Eric Ross takes a closer look at the exemptions the hospitals are able to make during the pandemic for those with disabilities.
Before the pandemic, visitors were allowed to be by a patient's side without any issues. But with new coronavirus restrictions in place, many patients are finding themselves in a hospital room alone. Now, some patients do just fine, but for Madeline Hardy and others like her who battle mental health issues, it can be a traumatic experience. So much so that she went in for colon surgery and ended up on suicide watch. She and her husband are speaking up, hoping more hospitals will better accommodate patients who need emotional support. September 2020, Madeline Hardy is rushed into emergency surgery for a twisted bowel, which required a colectomy. Doctors had to remove 2/3 of her colon. The surgery went well, but it was the recovery process where things went downhill.
Here I had just come out of surgery. I was in pain and scared and alone.
Madeline suffers from PTSD and wanted her husband Kim by her side. He was allowed to stay until the clock struck 8.
So at 8 p.m. I asked if I could stay, and they said, no, it's policy, you have to go home.
Kim says he asked for an exemption, but was denied.
And at 3 o'clock that night, I got a call from her. She was having what I recognize as a panic attack.
In the end, Madeline ended up being placed on suicide watch.
They took my phone, which was so traumatic. I said, please let me talk to somebody. There must, but I know that there's a hospitalist, a person who can override all this stuff. A friend of mine told me that there's such a thing, and they said, no, you can't talk to anybody.
But our research found that is not true. According to UC Health's own visitation policy, patients with disabilities may have specific needs for support. UC Health says all the patient needs to do is ask for their nurse, provider, or someone at the information desk for assistance. The hospital chain also saying patients can contact a patient representative who can then be a liaison between the patient and the hospital. Kim says he followed those steps, speaking with both a nurse supervisor and patient representative for UC Health. A patient representative for the hospital ultimately apologizing, saying in a letter, quote, "We are very sorry that you were disappointed with your experience. Please be assured that the issues raised will be reviewed and the responsible administrative and supervisory staff will take appropriate follow-up action. We also checked on hospital visitation exemptions for people with special needs at 3 of the other large hospitals in southern Colorado: Penrose St. Francis, St. Mary Corwin, and Parkview."
Case by case, on the day in question, Parkview leadership will review the request for more than one visitor or for an overnight visitor and grant certain exceptions.
Dr. Sandeep Vijan, Parkview's chief medical officer, says patient safety is always a top priority, which is why they've temporarily eliminated normal hospital visits during the ongoing pandemic. However, if a patient with disabilities has a pre-planned surgery or visit, call ahead to request an exemption. But if there's an unplanned emergency where you can't call ahead,
when they show up at our front entrance, they can notify our staff at the front entrance that they have a special need. The staff at the front entrance will know who to call. It's usually our nursing supervisor and administrator on call who's in the middle of making these decisions on the fly.
Other exemptions at Parkview include allowing visitors for end-of-life care, labor and delivery, and ER visits involving children. Meanwhile, St. Mary Corwin and Penrose St. Francis, which fall under Centura Health, allow similar exemptions for end-of-life care, pediatric patients, and labor and delivery. Regarding those with disabilities, Centura Health says, quote, "Patients with disabilities, which is defined by the ADA as a physical or mental impairment, may have a designated assistance person if requested. Appropriate personal protective equipment must be worn." Like Parkview, any exemptions will still have to be authorized, so don't assume you're just good to go. For pre-scheduled hospital procedures involving patients with disabilities, call your doctor ahead of time to request an exemption. For emergency situations, you can ask for a lead nurse or hospital administrator, but if you feel your concerns are not being handled appropriately, you can always ask for a patient representative. Most major hospitals across the country have at least one on staff.
The reason we're going public with this, we're not in it for any money or anything. We don't want this to happen to somebody else.
Now, to view each hospital's detailed visitation policy, we've posted them online at KOAA.com. Just search for this story on our homepage. Always watching out for you, Southern Colorado. I'm Chief Investigative Reporter Eric Ross.
Eric, thank you. And as always, if you have a problem or issue you'd like our News 5 Investigates team to look into, call our tip line anytime at the number on your screen or send an email to news5investigates@koaa.com.